We're so happy to have you. I know you're going to be sharing on your work, but just to introduce you briefly. So Roman is a public philosopher whose work has focused on the power of ideas to change society. We love that. Most recently has released The Good Ancestor, How to Think Long-Term in a Short-Term World, and we will share that link. And he is currently serving as a research fellow of the Long Now Foundation. Roman, welcome.
Thanks very much. I just want to make sure I'm sharing. There's my screen. I'm going to go to my full screen now. So hello to all of you. Back in 2019, teenagers across Europe began lobbying their parents and grandparents to give them their votes in the European parliamentary elections that year. And in fact, the hashtag Give the Kids Your Vote went viral on social media and was spread by climate campaigners as far as Australia. And my partner and I heard about it and decided to give our votes in the UK general election of 2019 to our 11-year-old twins. So we all sat around the kitchen table, and you can see them in the image there. We debated the party manifestos, and they then told us where to put the X on the ballot sheet. And in case you're wondering, no, they didn't simply copy their parents' political opinions. Now, the reason we did that is because we live in an age of chronic short-termism that ignores the interests of the generation upon generation of children who will inhabit the future. We know our politicians can barely see past the next election or the latest tweet. Markets spike, then crash in speculative bubbles. Nations sit around international conference tables, bickering away while the planet burns and species disappear. And as individuals, we're constantly clicking the buy now button and checking our phones. This is the age of the tyranny of the now, and we need long-term thinking to tackle the climate challenge, with carbon dioxide staying in the air for hundreds of years, sea levels going up for hundreds of years. We need it to tackle technology crises such as threats from artificial intelligence. Now, I believe that we have colonized the future. We treat the future like a distant colonial outpost where we can freely dump ecological degradation and technological risk as if there was nobody there. And the tragedy is that future generations aren't here to challenge this pillaging of their inheritance. You know, they can't stage a sit-in like a civil rights activist or go on a salt march to defy their colonial oppressors like Mahatma Gandhi, that granted no political rights of any kind, no influence in the marketplace. And to grasp the scale of this tragedy, it's quite difficult. But look at it this way. There are 7.7 billion people alive today, and an estimated 100 billion people have been born and died over the last 50,000 years. But both of these are far outweighed by the nearly 7 trillion people who will be born over the next 50,000 years, assuming current birth rates level off and stabilize. And in the next 2 centuries alone, tens of billions of people will be born, amongst them all your children and their grandchildren and their grandchildren and the friends and communities on whom they'll depend. So there's a real question there, isn't there, of how will those future generations look back on us? And someone who really thought about this was Jonas Salk, who developed the first polio vaccine in 1955. And in later life, he said, the big question we're facing is this: are we being good ancestors? In other words, how are we going to be remembered by those generations to come? And he believed if we were going to be remembered well, we need to extend our time horizons. And instead of thinking on a scale of seconds, minutes, and hours, we should think on a scale of decades, centuries, and even millennia. And there's some really inspiring projects around which take this long-term horizon perspective. One of them you can see in the image there is the 10,000-year clock, which is a clock which is being built as we speak in a mountain in the Texas desert, and it's been designed to last for 10 millennia. It's like a secular altarpiece for a long-term thinking civilization. So we're reminded to take responsibility for future generations. But something else really important is happening. There is a growing movement of what I think of as time rebels dedicated to extending our time horizons and fighting for intergenerational justice in the political and economic realms. Here are just some of them. There's an organization in the United States, a legal firm called Our Children's Trust, who has filed a landmark case against the US government on behalf of the 21 young people you can see there who are campaigning for the legal right to a safe climate and healthy atmosphere for both current and for future generations as well, for people who aren't even born. And their David versus Goliath struggle has inspired landmark lawsuits worldwide, from Colombia and Pakistan to Uganda and the Netherlands. And I'd like to see young people all across the world bringing lawsuits, fighting legal cases in your own countries with the help of organizations like Our Children's Trust, to fight for those rights for future generations and for your own generations to a clean climate and healthy atmosphere. So get into the legal struggles is one of my messages. But we can also find inspiration in an organization called Future Design, a movement in Japan inspired by the Native American idea of seventh generation decision making. And what they do is they bring together local residents to draw up and discuss plans for the towns and cities where they live, but typically divide them into two groups. Half of them are told they're residents from the present day. The other half are given these almost ceremonial robes to wear, those orange robes you can see in the photo, and told to imagine themselves as residents from the year 2060. Well, it turns out the residents from 2060 systematically come up with much more transformative plans for their towns and cities, from healthcare investment to climate change action. And this future design movement is sweeping and spreading across Japan, even to major cities like Kyoto. And I'd like to see that young people demanding to be part of movements like this, which are based on the citizen assembly model. It shouldn't just be left to adults. Teenagers should play a role too. And I also think that you can take inspiration for this in your own lives and schools. I'd like to see every school and college around the world setting up its own future council, a bit like Future Design. You might be wearing these robes like they are and bringing together students and teachers and local community members to take the long view and make long-term plans, asking the big questions like, are we planting the trees for the next generation that we need? Is our school becoming decarbonized? Are we turning it into getting committed to the circular economy and bringing in renewable energy? Are we changing the curriculum so that young people are given the skills they need to become long-term thinkers and planners of the future? I believe that if we're inspired by organizations like this, we can all become time rebels. It's time for us to become long-term thinkers, to plant a seed in the ground for posterity. And if we do things like this, we will become the good ancestors that future generations deserve. And with that, I'd like to stop.